I'm Szczepanski, and you're watching The Capitol on Live One TV. The upcoming wave of elections, the new leadership will determine the course as we navigate through the pandemic, with reopening the economy and also through the turbulent climate facing our communities, especially in major cities like New York City. My guest today is a force to be reckoned with the plan and ability to change the city around with a campaign to be your next New York City mayor. From Staten Island, Bill Pepitone joins us here on the Capitol. Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you for having me.
Before we begin, could you give our audience an introduction as to who you are, your background, and why you decided to run for mayor?
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, Xaverian High School graduate out of Bay Ridge. My father was a New York City police officer and New York City firefighter for 27 years. My uncle was a second grade detective in the street crime unit. My other uncle played first base for the Yankees back in the 1960s. So growing up, I knew I was going to be one of two things, either a baseball player or a New York City police officer. And being that I wasn't the greatest hitter in the world or the greatest runner in the world, I decided to be a New York City police officer and follow that dream. I served 20 years with the NYPD, 14 of which were in a citywide mobile response unit, counterterrorism. The last 5, I was a tactics instructor in the NYPD Police Academy. I have over 30 years experience in law enforcement, public safety, private security. And I decided to run for mayor last June when the city of New York was being overrun by riots and anarchists and criminals attacking police officers, attacking civilians, rioting, burning down buildings, looting, breaking into some of the most expensive and famous commercial real estate in the world. And the city of New York did not respond. They allowed the anarchists to do whatever they wanted. And with my experience as a police officer and my love for the city, I decided that I just couldn't sit there and watch this anymore, and I decided to get involved.
Thank you, Bill. Let's begin first with talking about public safety. That's a very pressing issue here in New York City. Just even a few days ago, we had shootings in Times Square. We have community violence that's on the rise, and we have brazen attacks on our police officers. What needs to be done to ensure public safety, and what needs to be done differently from the current administration?
A lot has to be done differently than the current administration. First thing we have to do is go back to proactive policing, which we did in the mid-90s in New York City under Mayor Giuliani. Right now we have a reactive police department that unfortunately, because of legislation and because of the atmosphere and the climate here in New York City, our police officers are afraid to take action for fear of losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, or being indicted. We can't survive like that. A city cannot survive like that. So we have to fight to repeal the legislation that has tied our police officers' hands. We have to support them. And again, we have to go back to proactive policing, which concentrates and addresses quality of life issues. This mayor, this administration has completely ignored quality of life issues. And because of such, it has acted as a gateway to more violent crimes. It goes back to the broken windows theory of policing that Mayor Giuliani and the NYPD carried out so successfully in the mid-90s, and I was a part of that as a police officer. It works. When you concentrate on quality of life, low-level issues, you stop the violence. You reduce the violent crimes, and this mayor hasn't done that, and we're seeing the results. Children being shot in Times Square, it's completely unacceptable.
What is the broken windows theory for those of us who are not familiar with it?
The broken windows theory is a theory of policing where you address low-level offenses, such as, to use the term broken windows, if you drive past a house one day and it has a broken window and you ignore it, well, within a couple of days there's going to be 2 broken windows. And then you're going to start to see graffiti and more vandalism, and maybe the weeds grow 6 feet high and the garbage starts to pile up. If you address that first broken window immediately, you stop the decay that's going to follow along with it. And that's how you address it with crime. If you start ignoring public intoxication, public lewdness, vandalism, graffiti, fare evasion, if you ignore it, criminals feel emboldened, and they feel that the police aren't going to take action, so they're going to push the envelope a little bit more, realize that it's not being addressed, and you're going to have exactly what you have right now. You have shootings, you have homicides, you have people being thrown in front of moving subway trains. This is an example of what happens when you don't address it.
Absolutely. When you speak of the legislation that has held back our police officers, one that comes to mind that's going through right now is the Floyd Act, which will take away basically police immunity from civil lawsuits, what kind of impact is that going to have to the morale of NYPD, and how are we going to attract top talent into the NYPD with this form of legislation going through?
It's having a devastating impact on the New York City Police Department and police officers. Removing qualified immunity basically leaves police officers open to civil liability just for doing their job. Just for doing their job within the scope of their employment, acting in good faith, they could conceivably lose their jobs or again be indicted for crimes. And that puts a police officer in a terrible position where he's going to hesitate. And when police officers hesitate, good people get hurt and good people die and police officers die. You just can't hesitate when you're a police officer. As far as attracting qualified candidates, top-notch candidates, you're not going to be able to do that. And the NYPD is going to have a retention problem because we're not going to be able to keep our veteran officers who just want to get their pensions and leave and go live quietly somewhere else, and a recruitment problem. People who want to be police officers don't want to come to New York City because of the legislation, because of the anti-cop climate, and it's making all of us less safe.
What are some of your ideas to be attracting top talent into the NYPD?
Well, first we have to put qualified immunity back in place. We have to repeal the diaphragm law, which was put in place by the City Council here in New York, which again makes it illegal for police officers to even put pressure on a person's diaphragm, even when they're trying to arrest a subject who's fighting with them, resisting arrest. Again, it makes it impossible for police officers to do their job. So we have to repeal that legislation. We have to make it clear that City Hall supports our police officers without question. And we have to, again, go back to proactive policing, allowing police officers to do their job. If people who want to be police officers look at New York City and see the model where you have a police department that has a high morale, that is being supported by their elected officials, and is being allowed to do their jobs and keep the city safe, you'll get those top quality candidates again.
How do we bridge more of the community between the police force and the community?
Conversation, face-to-face conversation. It has to be top-level officials from the city, top-level officials from the NYPD, and legitimate community leaders. They have to be legitimate community leaders who actually care about their neighbors and about their constituents. It can't be people who just want their name in the paper, people who are trying to stoke the flames of racism and racial tension. We don't want that. That didn't work. It never works. We need legitimate community leaders to sit in a room with city officials and NYPD officials and stay in that room until there are legitimate answers and legitimate solutions.
In Florida, Governor DeSantis has passed some of a very strict, to some controversial, but for Floridians it seems to be hailed, but an anti-rioting law. Is that something that could work here in New York City? What are your thoughts?
Without question, and we should have it here in New York City. Every city should have it. It's common sense. You can't riot. You can't burn down buildings. You can't burn down neighborhoods. You can't attack police officers and civilians. It's just a common sense law. And Governor DeSantis has been on the right side of that from the very beginning. He's been strong in his leadership, strong in his support of law enforcement, and strong in his support of law-abiding citizens. We don't have that here in New York City. Last year during the riots, we had a mayor who condemned the police officers who were responding to the riots and being attacked. We had a governor who said he sided with the protesters while New York City was burning. We need leadership like Governor DeSantis. He's absolutely right on the mark on this.
I want to turn the conversation now to school closures. If you were to give Governor DeSantis, I would give him an A. But if you were to give the current administration, Cuomo and also de Blasio, what grade would you give them?
Regarding school closures, they would get an F. They would get a failing grade. They did a terrible job from the very beginning with our schools and with our children. The message was convoluted. It wasn't clear. It wasn't concise. We had situations where children are being stuck home in front of a computer without talking to a real teacher, not even in the classroom. You can't learn like that. Our children can't learn like that. The facts and the data did not support full school closures. The numbers were very, very low. They were not a hot spot for the spreading of the disease, of the virus. So there was really no reason to do that. And they put a lot of children in jeopardy. They really hurt an entire generation of children. Child obesity is high, child depression is high, child suicide is high. This is all because of our leaders who made poor decisions and decisions that weren't made on facts and data.
How are we going to get the students who are now behind as a result of these school closures when around the U.S., some schools have remained open, and these students will arguably be ahead of those who have not been in school. How are we going to get students specifically here in New York City then who have been impacted by this to catch up?
We have to get them back in class 5 days a week in front of a teacher in the classroom. And we can do that. Again, the numbers are so low, there's no reason for the schools to be closed. We go back to 5-day-a-week learning. If there's a way we can add another hour to the school day, incorporate another class, whatever we have to do. But our children are so far behind, as you said, that we need to do something drastic for them to catch up. They've legitimately lost 2 years of learning. They're behind 2 years right now. So again, it's got to come down to 5 days in the classroom with a teacher in front of them. And if we have to add maybe another hour to the school day, I know there's a lot of contractual issues that come into play with that, but we have to do what's best for our kids. We have to prioritize our children.
What are your thoughts on school choice?
I believe that parents should have choice, and they should have more choices. And I believe the pandemic has shown that to be true more than ever. With the way our public school education system was run during the pandemic, parents needed an option. And whether it was private school, Catholic school, charter schools, a lot of them had to make that choice. Some, unfortunately, could not make that choice for whatever reasons. But the more choices our parents have, the better off our children have of succeeding. And I truly believe in school choice. I believe in charter schools. We have to do a better job with that.
What do you feel are the most pressing issues with this upcoming mayor campaign?
There are several. As we said, public safety is far and away the #1 issue. If you don't have public safety, you have nothing. You don't have an economy, you don't have safe schools, you don't have tourism, you have nothing without public safety. That is the #1 issue. #2 is our public education system. It's collapsing, it's on the verge of collapse. We have to go back to fair and legitimate grading system, 5 days a week in the classroom, specialized testing for high schools. The gifted and talented program has to be brought back, and our special needs children, we have to do a better job of working with them, meeting our IEPs, giving them all the tools and resources they need to succeed. Our economy, without question, has been almost completely destroyed by this pandemic and the lack of leadership by our elected officials. We have to make New York City business friendly again. Some of the tax rules, the tax laws we have in place, some of them go back to prohibition during the Al Capone, Elliott Ness era, especially in the alcohol industry. It's impossible to do business here in New York City. With the tax laws, with the red tape, with the bureaucracy, waiting months to years to get a permit, we have to be more business friendly. If we do that, if we relax some of these laws and regulations, we can open up New York City and tell the entire world New York City is open for business again. Bring business owners and investors back to the city, get the heartbeat of the city moving.
Because a lot of business owners have been leaving the city.
Yes.
What kind of incentive do they have to even start a business here when the economy has been collapsing? How can we bring back those small business to New York City?
Right now, there is no incentive. #1, we can't protect them, as we saw last summer. Our stores were burned down, and during the presidential election, we had rows of stores had to put up plywood to protect themselves and bring in private security with guard dogs. That is a horrible statement that was made last year. So first thing we have to do is protect people's investments. Then, again, as I said, we have to be business friendly. If we have to offer tax breaks and tax incentives, no, it's not the perfect situation. It's not the route we really want to go to, but we have no choice. We have to open up the city. We have to give people an incentive to come back here. And it starts with protecting them, and it starts with tax incentives, tax breaks, whatever we have to do, because we can't survive if our business owners keep leaving.
This month is going to be lifting a lot of the restrictions that we've had on the restaurant and the bar industry, which I'm very happy about that myself. On a lighter note, what are some of your favorite restaurants here in the city?
Oh, there was a lot of them. Most of them involve pizza, just so you know. I'm a Brooklyn boy, so I'm preferential to some of the Brooklyn pizzerias, L&B Spumoni Gardens for one. That's one of my favorites. Sheepshead Bay, some of the seafood places in Sheepshead Bay. Heading out to the Bronx, City Island. Seafood places in City Island have always been a favorite of mine. And of course, you can't go wrong in Manhattan. I ate at a hamburger place with my kids a couple of weeks ago, Jackson Hole. I'm giving them a little plug here. The food was amazing.
Support our small businesses.
Yes, support your small businesses, absolutely. It's New York. The greatest restaurants, the greatest bars, the greatest venues in the world. You can't go wrong anywhere.
Absolutely. I know when I started venturing out to some of my old favorite spots, because I've lived in New York since I was more than 10 years, and after the pandemic, when I started venturing out, I'm like, oh, I really hope this restaurant is still open. Because that was like the biggest, I guess with going out to restaurants, the biggest fear. I'm like, did my favorite spot close down? So have your favorite spots that you've mentioned, have they been able to survive the pandemic? How have
Yes.
they been impacted? Oh,
Yes,
good.
luckily, most of my favorites are still open and still going, which is a
Good.
great sign.
I'm glad.
So I'm happy about that. But we've lost so many others. That,
Do you feel that the restrictions that have been put in place over the past year with how de Blasio and Cuomo have been handling the lockdowns here in the city, has that been a restriction on people's basic American rights?
Absolutely, of course. Most of the guidelines and the restrictions that they put in place during the pandemic infringed upon our civil rights. And the biggest one was when they closed churches and houses of worship. That's our rights as Americans, for freedom of religion. It's right there. And they did it. I know there was a lawsuit, and I know the governor lost that lawsuit, rightfully so. If you're not allowed to practice religion here in the United States of America, then we're headed down the wrong road.
Another thing that I've been seeing as I've been just doing walk-arounds around Manhattan, for instance, and I do see an increase of like the vandalism and graffiti that's all over the place, especially as I've been going around the East Village in front of the Theater Stomp. Since our Broadway shows have been closed, there's like a homeless encampment that's actually starting to
Yes.
kind of grow right in front of that
Yes.
theater that's there.
Yes.
What are some of your plans on tackling the homeless situation as it's been exacerbated by this pandemic? And we saw how de Blasio handled it by putting people into hotels just in the Upper West Side with residents in the area. How would you handle it differently?
Well, first thing, you can't put people into hotels and turn around and walk away from them. You can't put them in shelters and turn around and walk away from them. The problem just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's exacerbated during the pandemic. If you're going to tackle the homeless crisis, your goal has to be to end the homeless crisis. That means temporary shelters that have to be put aside. It has to be about permanent housing, not just temporary shelters. The shelters are unsafe. Make them safe and start getting people into permanent housing. How do you do that? Through supportive housing with counselors in place, the resources that are needed to help counsel people to assimilate them back into society. Nobody wants to live in a shelter for the rest of their life. Nobody wants to live in temporary housing for the rest of their life. We need to get them back on the street in the workforce, get them jobs so they can go into full-time permanent housing. And again, we're not just talking about homeless men. This is homeless men, homeless women, homeless families. There are a lot of homeless families in New York City right now. We need to get them permanent housing, get them the counseling they need, and we also need to be proactive. Instead of just waiting for people to become homeless, we have to be proactive and find out what are the root causes which is spurring this homeless crisis. It's mental illness, it's drug abuse, certainly COVID. A lot of people were not able to afford their homes, afford their apartments anymore. So what we have to do is be proactive in reaching out to people who are struggling before they get displaced. We want to address their problems before they get displaced, and that comes down to more counseling centers, more counselors, and more outreach.
You mentioned about how people are not being able to afford their homes and their rent. What are your thoughts with creating more affordable housing in the city?
I think we need it. I think we're at a position right now with the way our city is and so many unfortunate people, we're going to have to create more affordable housing. People have a right to live. This is New York City. It's always been a place that's opened their arms to everyone, and we have to do that. Right now, we're pricing out far too many people, far too many families. We're losing good people and good families, and that's not what New York City has ever been about. So yes, we're going to have to go down that road and create more affordable housing so people can stay here.
Now, Bill, we've discussed your thoughts on public safety. We've talked about the homeless situation, creating affordable housing, and various other issues. What other goals do you have as mayor?
Well, I think the first thing the mayor has to do, he has to be a unifying presence here in the city. We've had a mayor for the past 7+ years has done nothing but divide the city. I mean, from spray painting slogans on the street to pandering to criminals and anarchists, he has divided an entire city. The mayor has to be a unifying presence. He has to be a mayor for everyone, for every community, for every person. And that message has to be loud and it has to be clear from day one. And as mayor, that's going to be my message from day one on the steps of City Hall. This is everyone's city. Every community, every person has a right to be safe in this city, to get a good education in the city and to make a good living. It's the American dream. And that mayor, the next mayor of New York City, which will be myself, is going to push that message and make that message loud and clear. And it's going to be a stark contrast to the last 7+ years.
You mentioned the American dream. This is a topic I love to talk about as the daughter of immigrants, my father being a communist refugee into the country, and both my parents coming into America for a pursuit of the American dream. I feel as I've talked to various people, there's differences as to what they're going to define the American dream as, and also just among even like my own cohort. How do you define the American dream, and how have you witnessed it here in New York City? I feel that New York City really epitomizes that. How do you define the American dream?
Pretty much how I just explained. The American dream is having the right to feel safe, to be protected, the right to an education, the right to worship your religion, freedom of religion, the right to go to work each day to support your family and protect your family. How have I seen that play out? I'll tell you a story about my grandfather. My grandfather was born in Italy, came over to the United States as a young boy, and grew up here as an American citizen and served in the United States Navy in World War II, and was actually on the USS Savannah when it was bombed by the enemies and sunk. And he survived that. He survived that, and he was able to raise a family. It's my mother's father. And he built his own business, a tile business on his own, with his own 2 hands. And he created a great life for my mom, and in essence, a great life for me, from the ground up. He was somebody who came over from another country, fought for this country against his own country, as we were in World War II, against Italy, and built a life for his family here. And that is a perfect example of what America can offer to anyone, from any country. We can do that. And we do it, or we used to do it on a daily basis. Things have become very, very complicated right now. It's a very different world, I understand that. But still, the ideology about what America is and what America represents, that should still be there.
Bill, thank you very much for joining us today at the Capitol. Do you have any final words for our audience? And where can people find you?
People can find me everywhere right now. My website, Pepitone for NYCmayor.com. I'm on Facebook, Bill Pepitone for NYC Mayor. I'm on Twitter, @Pepitone for NYC. You're going to see a lot of me as we go on, as we shoot towards November. I am already on the ballot for the general election in November under row C for the Conservative Party. So you'll be able to vote for me for mayor. I'm going to be a mayor for all New Yorkers and to keep New Yorkers safe, help our children, and make New York City the greatest city in the world once again.
Absolutely. We thank you for joining us on this episode of The Capitol on Live One TV. I'm Szczepanski. We hope this will help our viewers from New York City to stay informed and make the right decision for voting for the upcoming NYC mayor elections. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Tara.